Hey guys, this is Cass in Court TV, and this is your girl, Miss Public Info, coming to you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, litigants of the court. We are in session, and who is ready for the first lesson now? Litigants, here at Cass in Court TV, we want to make sure we always get the story right. We want to make sure that we are expressing parity, that we make sure that we're expressing equity, and that we're telling the story the way that it is. So earlier we had a story about the judge admonishing Mark Geragos and his comments as it related to the prosecution on the Two Angry Men podcast, as he was making some remarks about the prosecution team being an all-white woman prosecution team. And what we realized is that this actually happened last month. So we want to give you the information and the news, but we need to make sure we were clear that this did not happen this morning on the trial date, but this happened last month. So we're going to talk about this again, but we're going to do so with the right premise in terms of it happening on last month. This story that I'm talking about right now has been sourced by Business Insider. They actually broke the story last month, but I thought it was interesting to talk about because this is actually part of some of the commentary that I gave on episode 3, where I'm talking about the juror situation where Judge Arun Submaranian was really upset with the court, with the both sides. He didn't know which, if it was the prosecution or the defense, who was giving information over to TMZ to break the story about the juror 7 alternate situation. And because that was done during a sealed session, and it was not supposed to get out. So that said, it's important to note that Mark Geragos is the attorney for Combs' mother, Janice Combs, and so he is also the father of Tenny Geragos, who is the one of the head attorneys for Combs' defense team. So it's important to keep those two things in mind as we talk about it, because though Mark Geragos is not part of the actual defense team that's arguing the case and everything, he's very much a consultant. He's very much involved, I am sure, though I am not 100% sure, but I'm sure he's a very involved consultant, and he definitely uses the Two Angry Men podcast to sort of talk about the case in some ways. Now, that being said, Mark Geragos, just to give folks a little bit of rundown of his resume, he's somebody that's defended Michael Jackson in the past. He's been the lawyer for Chris Brown and many other celebrities. So he is somebody who is used to this judicial process. He's a very, very experienced criminal attorney. But back in May, this was during the time in which they were actually in the middle of picking the jury. This is a very sensitive time that this happened. So back in May, Mark Geragos was on the Two Angry Men podcast with Harvey Levin, who is the co-founder of TMZ. He was on the podcast, and he basically said that that it was the prosecution had 6 women, all white. So Judge Submaranian was outraged by this. As a matter of fact, he said that I'm quoting him as saying that the remarks were outrageous. He had a closed door meeting with Mark Geragos. I'm not sure if if the defense team were there or not, but he had a closed door meeting with him, and it was back in the early parts of May, and in his robing room, and where he talked about where he basically lambasted Mark Geragos, and this is according to the Business Insider, for describing the all-female prosecution team, and I quote, as a 6-pack of white women, is what he said. Now, he's a 1-pack of white man, so this is very derogatory remark, but coming from him, it's silly, right? But it's just derogatory in general. You're not allowed to say these things. Plus, these are extrajudiciary comments that, as an attorney, even though he's a consulting attorney on the case, you really shouldn't be making these comments at all. You need to run a clean race here. So this is what Judge Submaranian had to say in response, and he said this to Mark Geragos. This, although it was a closed meeting, the clerk of the court transcribed this, and that's why we have it, and that's why Business Insider was able to write the article. And he says, when you say things on a podcast like six women, all white, my understanding is you've got a six-pack of white women, Submaranian says. Like, that's something that you shouldn't, that's no one should be saying as an officer of the court and a member of the bar, right? And so, Geragos is pretty smug about it. He kind of doesn't, really outright, say, I was wrong, I'm sorry for this, I'm sorry for that, or anything like that. So Submaranian, he goes on to admonish Geragos for the comments about the prosecutors, saying that he violated a court rule barring lawyers involved in ongoing cases from making extrajudiciary comments about them. Now, typically, extrajudiciary comments, in my experience in working, as a public information officer, I'm very involved in that process in terms of working with the attorneys and making sure they're towing the line. Attorneys are really great. Prosecutors that I was working with, they were really great about not doing that, and so I didn't really have that issue, but it was something that I was always very aware of and paying attention to, so I didn't really have that issue with the attorneys I was working with. But it is definitely something that most judges will bar attorneys from doing it, particularly in high profile cases like this. They will bar them from making extrajudiciary comments, and that's basically any comments that don't have any relevance to the actual specifics of the case, and particularly among attorneys who are not in the actual mix of the case. So these are consulting attorneys, like Mark Geragos is in this particular instance. And I would say extrajudiciary comments also includes consulting attorneys. So it's just not the attorneys who are on the defense actively arguing the case or on the prosecution actively arguing the case, but also any consulting attorneys that might be on the sideline just sort of helping, research or doing, consulting and helping represent family members, like in this case. So he basically had said that, he said that he believes, and he told Submaranian this, that his response to Submaranian was that he believes the rule forbidding extrajudicial comments has been perverted over the years, and it interferes with the rights of defendants to receive a fair trial. And he also said that he has refrained from criticizing the lawyers who represent the women who have accused Combs of sexual assault. And so he at the time hinged all of this on Combs being a black man and being prosecuted, and that Combs feeling like he's being targeted. But obviously we know this has nothing to do with him being a black man. This has to do with the fact that these charges are warranted based upon what the law says that you're not allowed to do, based upon what the law says is illegal activity. So that's what this is about. This is not about you being black or you not being white, or this person being white or that person not being black. This is about the law and about what the law says is illegal. And now, because the Constitution and your constitutional rights say you have a right to a fair trial, that's what we're doing now. But one of the prosecutors on the case Mary Slevick. And I thought what she said was very important. And this goes back to episode 3 when I talked about if there is a mistrial in this case. She said that Geragos' podcast had millions of subscribers and that his remarks could reach jurors in the case. Now, at the time, they had not chosen the jury, or they were actually in the midst of choosing the jury. So that's important. And so she says, and quote, this TMZ podcast that Mr. Geragos is a part of has several millions of subscribers, she said. The danger of Mr. Geragos' statements infecting the jury pool, I think is very serious. Now, that's very interesting that she would say that at that time, because they were picking the jury pool. It was very easy for them to, listen to the podcast and be swayed or influenced by it. But even now, I would say that that is an issue, because again, if we are in a situation where there is a mistrial, let's just say there's a hung jury, then whomever is out there right now is reading these particular articles after the fact. They're listening and looking at everything else after the fact, right? So that means that they're being influenced by whatever publications that are out there, whatever literature that is out there, whatever is out there. So that's why Geragos speaking on this podcast, Geragos talking about the case on the podcast is very dangerous. Now, Submaranian at the time said that he would be monitoring the Two Angry Men podcast for additional comments from Geragos, and that he would have one more listener. And Geragos, smugly, in my opinion, retorted back, as long as you subscribe, I'm all for it. It's very smug. That's not something you say to a judge. And it's like, for me, it's just like, okay, the audacity. You know what I mean? And if I'm Tenny Geragos, it's my case, and my dad is, a consultant on the case, or he's representing one of the family members on the case, then I'm, like, Dad, you need to calm down a little bit. You know what I'm saying? That's just my own personal opinion. I'm not a lawyer, but at the same time, like, in any business, me as, a PR professional, I would say to anyone in my family who was in the business with me and they were making some moves that were, dangerous to a client that I was working with, I would say the same thing to them. Look, what you're doing right now is not okay. You're going to get both of us in trouble, or you're sabotaging both of us. I think what Mark Geragos did back last month is very sabotatory. There's a lot of sabotaging that could happen for the case, for the defense, But then if we fast forward and see what actually ended up happening as it related to the jury, as it related to Judge Arun Submaranian getting upset about this, Juror 6, Juror 7 situation, and TMZ reporting on things that they would have no knowledge of based upon the fact that it was a sealed session, it makes you even more and strengthens my speculation and my resolve that perhaps this was a situation where someone on that defense team, whether it was Mark Geragos or someone else on the defense, fed that information to TMZ, because obviously there is a relationship there. And I know Judge Submaranian said that he was going to be, investigating that and doing that. And we haven't heard anything else about that since then. But I wanted to make sure, I wanted to bring this out because when I read this information and came across the Business Insider article, I was like, oh, wow, this has actually been happening from the beginning. I actually didn't get this tidbit of information about the roping room incident with Mark Geragos. And it's significant. It's significant what's going on with this, because I truly believe that the defense is probably going to try to use the Juror 6 removal or dismissal as a post-conviction um, as a post-conviction appeals issue. Okay, it has all the markings of it. It probably will be one of those things if Combs is convicted, that is. And so because there was a situation where somebody leaked some information to, TMZ, who gave information out of a sealed meeting, that could create a kerfuffle there. So stay tuned, everyone. Obviously, we're all getting geared up for closings. I believe what I last read from the court, I believe they've adjourned for today, but the last that I've read from the court is that we're looking at getting to closings by Friday, and the jury probably will not begin deliberations until probably Monday, at the earliest, is what I believe I read out of the last thing I read out of the transcripts, from the prosecution, of what they're thinking could happen. So let's everybody sit tight, stay tuned. It's going to be a bumpy ride, but here at Cast in Court TV, it's our job to make sure that our reporting has parity, that our reporting is clarity, and that we are doing the best we can for our watchers, for those that are subscribers, and those that depend on our reporting and our analysis each day. So we'll come back to you later on today with a recap of day 29 of the Diddy case, and we look forward to seeing you guys then. We'll be adjourned until that time. Thanks so much, guys. We'll see you later.